There's something to be said about kicking it old school, and based on that montage I just did, you can see that this week's video, Wizordum, does exactly that. Developed by Emberheart Games and published by the reborn Apogee Entertainment, which was the home for a whole host of classics like Blake Stone and Rise of the Triad, as well as publishing new and exciting things like the absolutely incredible Turbo Overkill, which I will never shut up about. Play Turbo Overkill, you cowards! But yeah, today we are going to be looking at and talking about Wizordum, which feels like the boomerest of boomer shooters considering the inspirations. So let's get into it, shall we? There actually is a story in Wizordum, and it goes as such. Set in the fantasy world of Terra Bruma, you play as a lone mage who must fight their way through the hordes of goblin mercenaries and undead to get to the frozen peaks of the north to find and stop the source of the spreading chaos. For as simple as that setup is, it's a good one. Wizordum also feels like it's cribbing from Warhammer Fantasy a bit, but with some stuff moved around. While you don't have evil murder Vikings and souped-up magical power armor blessed by a pantheon of dark gods, you do have a variety of greenskins, their giant animal companions, and a veritable horde of the undead, which sadly aren't Egyptian-themed. Yes, that's a real part of Warhammer. Google Tomb Kings and prepare to have your minds blown by how cool they are. But getting back on track, a lot of the environments actually do a lot of the narrative heavy lifting. You just see lots, and I mean lots, of dead mages who try and fail to do the same quest as you, with most being corpses hunched over in corners, against walls, and some even being rather gruesomely strung up. And this ties into the sense of escalation that the narrative takes across the environments as well. Episode 1 takes place entirely in the city of Grimbrook and its surrounding outskirts, to the forests, swamps, and ziggurats of Episode 2, to the wind-swept mountains, mines, and demonic hellscapes of Episode 3. It starts off all bright and colorful, and then, when you get to the halfway marker in Episode 1, you get smacked in the face with how dire the situation really is. The in-between narration of each episode and the intro are also doing a good job of setting the stakes because goddamn, some of this shit is grim as hell. But I'll talk more about that part when I get to the presentation, because right now, I need to talk about the gameplay in Wizordum. While Wizordum is a first-person shooter, I want you to take a really close look at the screen and see how it plays if you haven't been actively watching the video so far. Because while most of them are inspired by either Doom or Quake, does Quake even qualify as Boom Shoot? That was 1986. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Wizordum is inspired by two specific games, Heretic by Raven Software, and perhaps more importantly, Wolfenstein 3D. So I guess that makes it less boomer shooter and more silent generation shooter? Hell, this game is kicking it so goddamn old school that it's got a fucking score counter! I'm getting off track. A lot of that comes down to the fact that the levels in Wizordum are absolutely massive in size. I'm talking genuinely huge at times. And this is good because it feels like they were made for it. In Wolfenstein 3D, the levels of Castle Wolfenstein and later areas were all these giant mazes that you had to navigate while also shooting Nazi scum. The navigation was a huge part of the challenge, or at least that's how I remember it, because I haven't played that game in 25 years. In any case, this goes a long way to making each of these areas feel like lived in or at least occupied spaces. And that also ties into the secret hunting, because there are usually around a dozen or more secrets per level, and looking for these is encouraged, because these lead you to caches of treasure and consumable items. The latter are important because they act like the active power-up items in Heretic. I'm talking health and haste potions, elixirs of stone skin, spell scrolls for small stuff like AoE fireballs, invisibility cloaks, and even the Wizard's Wrath, which is basically Heretic's tome of power that doubles your weapon strength, so you best believe that I use those to go full-on rampage mode at times. And the treasure is even more important because of how tied to exploration it is. The more you explore, the more treasure you get, and the more treasure you get, the more upgrades you can buy. It's like an exploration-based version of the Essence system in the 3D Ninja Gaiden games. And these can range from weapon upgrades to extra spell charges to character upgrades, like extra ammo, extra grenades, and the like. And this leads me to the actual minute-to-minute stuff in Wizordum. You start off by picking one of two character classes, the Cleric and the Sorceress. Cleric is a bit slower, but also a bit bulkier and has a stronger defensive playstyle, and the Sorceress is a bit squishier, but is faster and has a more offensive playstyle. They have their own sets of spells that they learn, and they get the other classes' spells as consumable spell scrolls, which is pretty neat. I went with the Sorceress because their combat tempo is a bit on the faster side, and I like to live dangerously. And this is reinforced with their spells being a Blink, a Cone of Cold, a Reflective Spell Shield, and a Haste spell that increases your weapon's rate of fire. Speaking of weapons, in Wizordum you get 9 weapons. A melee weapon that can be charged, a wand or mace depending on the class, a pair of magic rings that let you shoot fireballs, a magic-infused firearm called the Spell Striker that serves as your shotgun equivalent.
This is my boomstick!
You also get some wilder stuff like a staff called the Frost Weaver that lets you freeze and shatter enemies, Pyroblast, a fireball spell so powerful that its ammo is finding spell scrolls of it and is your rocket launcher equivalent. Very good for bigger enemies and bosses. You also get the Storm Gauntlets in Episode 2, a pair of magical plate mail gauntlets that let you shoot lightning to stun and kill enemies, which I use specifically so I can do my best Darth Sidious impression. Then you get the Feywood Crossbow, which is a crossbow that uses nature magic to snipe enemies from an absurd distance and can overpenetrate targets. It's super goddamn powerful, great for sniping enemies from a long distance, and is basically the crossbow from dusk. And then Episode 3 gives us our most absurd weapons. Like the Staff of Chaos, a gnarly looking magic staff, topped with one of the eyes that serve as the ending level gates that you destroy to progress. It follows the old Warcraft 3 and early World of Warcraft definition of chaos damage, where it just fires out random projectiles of every elemental type. And last but not least, we have the Grimoire, a powerful tome holding heretical blood magics, bound by the skin of its former owner. That's the flavorful way of saying this is your BFG equivalent. All it takes is one bloody pentagram drawing in the air and boom! Everything in the immediate vicinity is either dead or wishing it was dead. Between this and the upgrades for each weapon, like the Fire Rings getting the Burning Hand spell from D&D as a secondary firing mode, the Storm Gauntlets getting Chain Lightning, the Boomstick getting Super Bullets, those disposable spells and magic items I mentioned earlier, and these neat little crystal ball grenades, you have a really cool arsenal of magic at your disposal that does a good job of making you feel like you have phenomenal cosmic power, when Wizordum isn't absolutely brutalizing you. What I mean is that Wizordum is in the business of kicking your ass, and kick your ass it will. Between the greenskins alone, you get these annoying little bastards that snipe you with fireballs, small melee dudes, big melee dudes, even bigger melee dudes that fire out shockwaves, and gyrocopter pilots. And there's also the undead with the standard zombies, skeleton warriors, and skeleton archers with bigger and nastier variants of each, goddamn liches that resurrect enemies, 2 different kinds of ghost enemies, and that's not getting into the miscellaneous stuff like giant rats, tentacles that shoot slime, exploding slime monsters, giant spiders of the leaping and acid-spitting variety. Now you're probably thinking, wow, that's a lot of stuff. Does it let up? To which I say, no, I haven't even mentioned the demons and lava monsters yet. I'm sorry, I got a little carried away there. What I'm saying here is that Wizordum is hard. It will use all of these and the levels to break your back and make you humble. But you can kill them just as fast, if not faster. All it requires is for you to not be a situationally unaware clown. When played correctly, Wizordum, at least on normal and as the sorceress, feels like a fast-paced back and forth of swapping weapons and spells to kill enemies. Granted, I stuck with the Rings of Fire, the Frostweaver Staff, and the Boomstick, but those are just the workhorse weapons, and ammo for those was everywhere. But to put into context as to how much the difficulty was escalating, I was running low on ammo for those 3 weapons consistently. That's one way to get you to swap, I guess. Overall, combat is super fun in Wizordum, but it's also an old-school themed first-person shooter. Of course it was going to be fun. My biggest issue was still my evergreen lack of direction, because of course it was. It led to me finishing levels that have par times around 8 to 10 minutes, being done in 15 to 20. That's how lost I get. But that's just me, though. Wizordum is sporting a pixel-based art style that seems simple at first glance, but uses it as the basis for something deceptively impressive from a visual standpoint. With its bright colors and simple layouts, it initially lulls you into thinking it's a nice, light romp through a colorful fantasy realm, and then BAM! You start level 4, and you're in a graveyard. I live again. Wizordum likes to wear its influences on its sleeves, and this ties into what I was talking about near the beginning of the video. It uses its visuals to imbue its storytelling with a sense of escalation. Between the other dead wizards, the destroyed townscapes, the wilderness being kind of messed up, and the literal demonic mirror of the first level, Wizordum is doing some seriously great heavy lifting in the visuals department. And that's on top of the really ambitious stuff, like this one level in episode 2 that's an entire battle on a riverboat in the swamp, and the mines late in episode 3 that do a lot of cool scrolling in 3D stuff when in drivable minecarts. It's all really cool to see. The audio has a great fantasy-themed soundtrack that has a nice mix of ambient, heroic, and even downright sinister pieces of music playing when appropriate. Overall, Wizordum is an audio-visual treat. Wizordum has been a very nice surprise, and if there's one way I can describe it compared to a lot of its indie contemporaries, is that it's very pared down. And I don't mean this in a derogatory way. It takes the few areas that it does focus on, and does the absolute best it can with them. And that just so happened to be delivering on some of the finest ye olde rippeth and tear this side of Project Warlock, which, now that I think about it, the sequel for that is going to be out of early access when this goes live. I think I'll do that. But first, I got something I need to stand and fight about. If you stayed this long, thank you for watching. If you could like the video and subscribe, it would help the channel out a whole bunch. Thanks for watching, and take care out there.